Macklin, for, I don't know, probably the whole part of your 18 years on this earth, you have dreamt of your NHL debut. How did the first period match up to what you dreamt of?
It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. It was everything I dreamed of, so it was awesome.
Welcome to 32 Thoughts, the podcast presented by GMC. Sramaty, Friedman, Bukauskas with you. Elliotte, I think the only thing that could one-up the beauty of the first true busy night of the regular season on Thursday was the Northern Lights on display seemingly all over North America. Did you catch any of it?
You know what? No. I'm married to the job, Kyle. I stayed inside. I saw lots of pictures. I was watching the games, but now I feel shame because I probably should have gone outside and looked at nature.
I figured a big open concept at the Friedman estate, it would have been easy just to peek outside the window.
No, Kyle, I think you overestimate exactly how I live. Live beneath your means, I always say. Live beneath your means. Okay, I want to talk to you for a second because you were in Ottawa tonight actually working, and great game. Ottawa gets a huge win. Immediately, Ullmark establishes himself as a difference maker, makes some saves when Florida started to make a charge. Tim Stützle with a great effort on the empty netter to clinch the victory for the Senators. But on that same play, the moment they both went into the boards leg first, I was like, uh-oh. And Stützle got up, but Barkov didn't. He needed help. What did you see around the arena?
Yeah, I mean, first off, cap tip to like the in-house production crew because they didn't go all out on the horn and the goal song and that, where it could have been a celebratory moment for the Sens capping off the win, understanding what was going on and seeing that Barkov was in discomfort. So Paul Maurice, after the game, didn't have any update, which wasn't a surprise, said he's going to get checked out post-game, going to get checked out on Friday as well. Someone said to me, because I was over on the Ottawa side gathering post-game sound over there, someone said that they saw Barkov walk out of the arena without any assistance or a walking boot or anything like that.
Hope that's true.
Hopefully that's true, and hopefully that means it's a good sign as we go along here. But man, for a Panthers team and talking to them in the morning on Thursday, they have the ring ceremony. Nick Cousins got his ring Wednesday night, met up with some of his old teammates to get that handed off as well. And one of the players was saying to me, it was almost perfect for them that it was Boston right out of the gate because it got their attention from the jump, on top of the banner raising and everything that goes with opening night. You get the win there, and now suddenly, man, a little uncertainty on the injury front with your captain. It changes things. But as we say, until we know more, Paul Maurice didn't have much post-game. We wait with some bated breath here around the Panthers.
Well, first of all, you hope he's okay. But secondly, you're right. Like, that is the kind of injury that could change some of the race in the Eastern Conference. Like, you look at Florida and you still think, despite the result on Thursday night, they're a good team. They got a lot of good players. But Barkov is really the linchpin to all of it. In a lot of ways, I think Tkachuk is the emotional leader or a Bennett is the emotional leader. But Barkov is their captain and their best skater. So I'm with you on this. You wait with bated breath because you don't like to see injuries have an effect on the races and on a team's season, but there's no question that this one could have a huge effect on the Eastern Conference. Now, there was a lot of enthusiasm coming in Ottawa. I'm sure nothing that you saw on Thursday night is going to erase the hype train. What did you see? Besides Ullmark immediately justifying the entirety of his contract.
First of all, remember last episode when you said you wanted to know the first person that gave me the stink eye for saying no
I did.
when we
I did want to know
Ottawa playoffs or no. So it was a great guy by the name of Luke that works security when I walked into the building Thursday night. He looked at me and he goes, "Hey, podcast? No playoffs for the Sens?" I said, "Luke, I just had to make sure you were listening." So he was the first guy to give
Luke,
it to me.
I don't even know who you are, but you are my new favorite Senators employee.
Yeah, that's right. So that was a great way to start the night. You know what? I thought Allmark, of course, was the big star, one of them for sure. Stützle has a great night. I think we got a taste of what we could see from Shane Pinto. Of course, he scores the goal, but how that all started, making a good play in his own zone and creating the opportunity at the other way. You watch how that third period played out, Elliotte. Like, the Panthers turned it on as you would have expected. They started to get rolling around in the offensive zone, but I go back to, again, I felt last season it was too simple to say if Ottawa got just a few more saves, they would be a playoff team. I think the flaws went deeper than that. Allmark is a huge help, of course, but how they play in front of them in their own zone, that's been a major focal point for Travis Green and company throughout training camp. Wasn't perfect at times, but there was a lot of times where the Panthers were forced to the outside. All those high danger chances that Ottawa has leaked in the past, and Stützle even made reference to it post game. In years past, that was the kind of game we would have made some silly mistakes and ended up losing that one, but they didn't. They hung on, they had to survive at times, and they got the win. So that's one step, I think, for a team that needed to get off to a good start and not be playing from behind right away. It's only one win, I understand. But for a team that had a lot of hype and build up to game 1 of 82, and given the opponent that was on the other side, I thought it was a good place to start for them. What did you see?
I just thought that everyone in Ottawa, there's been a lot of nights where people have left that building not going home happy for a lot of different reasons. Nobody left that building unhappy, except for the Panthers.
Yes. So that was the story in Ottawa, Elliotte. You want to talk about Toronto next? 2 games into their season?
Let's go there, because there was one of the things I say about the Canadian teams, I can't say how often I've told people this over the years. When you're in Canada, things are going to happen that you don't control, right? And there's always going to be controversy, and there's always going to be things that occur, and you just have to navigate those. The most important thing you can do is you can limit the amount of damage that you cause on yourself. Don't create self-inflicted problems. That's the number one thing, I think, for Canadian hockey teams to do. Just don't pour gasoline on the fire. On day 1 of the season, Toronto gets a fire, and it's not even their own creation. It is, there were rumors going around on Tuesday night that Joseph Woll had gotten hurt at practice, and it sounds like, if you ask some of the reporters who have been around there more than I have, that they'd been noticing he didn't seem right for about 3 or 4 days. Like, going back to even before the exhibition game he played last Saturday against Detroit, that they noticed something in practice and he didn't seem right. So Tuesday night, there were rumors he wasn't going to play in Montreal. There were a few denials. And then on Wednesday morning, came the word that Dennis Hildeby was on his way to join the team, and it was likely going to be Stolarz Hildeby as the tandem, with Woll going on injured reserve, which is what happened. And Woll was supposed to play against Montreal, and they got goalied by Samuel Montembeault, who looked fantastic and is going to make a Team Canada case here if it continues it like this. And then Stolarz was supposed to play Thursday at home near New Jersey, and they had to make the change. Like, this is one of those cases. Some people were debating with me, what do you do in game 2? And I said, look, you've already got Woll hurt. You can't take a chance. You cannot play Stolarz. Like, you cannot take that chance. And unleash the beast. They did. They played Hildeby, the Hilda Beast, as Kyle alludes to. Like, one of my buddies was like, well, it's a home game for Stolarz. You've got to play him. And I just said, look, there are times in the world where you would like to do things for people, and there are other times in the world where the realities of life and the job say, sorry, there is no room here for romance. And in a lot of our relationships out there is never any room for romance. I've seen some of you guys in action. But There's no room for romance. You've got to do the business thing. And this was the business thing. And I'll tell you this. Someone called me the other day about Hildeby, and they said, this is a guy I know who watched a ton of Marlies last year because they're like on his path where he scouts. And he said to me that Dennis Hildeby was the number one prospect for the Maple Leafs in the American Hockey League last year, and number two was distantly in the rearview mirror. That's what he said. He's that much of a fan of Hildeby. And Swedish goalie, last year was his first year in North America. He said, this guy is going to be a player. And I actually heard last year around the deadline, when the Maple Leafs were poking around things, they got a lot of those talks. Like Hildeby's name came up. Like, what are you guys thinking there? Could he be involved? And they resisted it. And, he gave up one that he probably wanted back. I think it was the second goal kind of leaked through him. But other than that, like, he looks like he's a player. And, I think this, like, I can't remember who tweeted it, but I saw it on social media. Like, who would have guessed that Hildeby would have had a win this year before Wool did? And it was a pretty good line, but he's a player. Like I think Toronto really thinks that he's going to be a good goalie for them. Now Wool, he's on injured reserve. He's going to be out for a few games. Some of the talk in Toronto was, how are these guys going to trust him? They're going to lose faith. How can they believe in him? When things like that get said, what I really wonder about is it opinion or is someone telling people this? And opinions are fine, like everybody's entitled to them, but I think there's a difference between that's what people are saying and that's what is being told them. And that's what I always wonder. And right now, I can't tell, to be perfectly honest, if there's any team-wide disappointment at it, but I do think they were hoping, they were definitely hoping that it wouldn't be the case right now, and they have no choice but to bubble wrap them. Now, one question I asked was, how does this compare to like Demko? Because right now, Demko is in bubble wrap, and we might not see him for a month. And if I was the Canucks, I would be, we might not see him for a month. So if I was the Canucks, I would be like, you're not going anywhere near a game until we're absolutely sure about that. And I think the Leafs have to be the same way. But from what I heard, the timeline is not that. Like, we're not looking at something here the Maple Leafs don't believe, where Wool is going to be out a long time. They seem to think this is a minor thing. And because of his history and because it's early in the year, they're putting the clamps down, which they should. Now, the other thing about this that was really interesting was they called up Hildeby instead of Murray, because I know when they convinced Murray to come back this year, one of the things they talked to him about was he was going to be the number 3. And I just think simply if you look at the preseason, Hildeby played more, and he was really good too, but he played more. And I just got the sense that the Maple Leafs feel, you know what? Again, Matt Murray's a guy who's battled a lot of injuries. I think they have a plan for him, and they want to stick to that. So, I mean, it was crazy. There was a lot going on there, and it's just one of those things. You sit there at the start of the year and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this has happened already. We're shutting you down, although they seem confident this isn't a major problem.
So one thing I heard about Joseph Woll too, Elliotte, was so this guy is a competitor. Of course, any goalie that makes it to the NHL, you're a competitor of some kind. But this guy in practice, like it's that from that infamous Charlie Sheen interview years ago, I've got one speed, one gear, go. Like there's only one level he knows to battle at, and it's game intensity, even in practice. And so I kind of got the sense that that's one of the conversations that they have either already had with them or the Leafs feel they are going to have with them about changing that mindset a little bit where it doesn't need to be all gas, no brakes in terms of intensity all the time. So I wonder if as things go forward here and he's healthy enough to be in the crease again, do they alter his work schedule on off days? Does it become something where he does some work with Curtis Sanford, the goaltending crew, a little bit before practice, hangs around for the first few drills of practice, and then heads off early just to manage all of that? That's something I wonder about with Woll once he's healthy again, how they go about adjusting the days in between games to try to ensure the workload isn't overbearing over the course of a long year.
So it's funny you mentioned that, because that's what's going on, exactly what's going on in Vancouver with Demko. One of the things that they are doing is they are changing his workload. Ian Clark, who was the great goalie coach in Vancouver, who's now no longer in that day-to-day position, he was a hard work guy, and it was very successful. You look at all like Bobrovsky never wanted to take a day off, and he's going to the Hall of Fame. Luongo never wanted to take a day off, and he's in the Hall of Fame. And, it was the same kind of thing with Demko, and he has the kind of talent that would eventually take him potentially to the Hall of Fame. But I think that now, in this day and age, I think you're seeing a lot of more teams starting to say that can't do this anymore, that there has to be more rest. And it's sort of like exactly what's happened in pitching with goaltending. Now, I get annoyed when pitchers come out of games. I think there's too many pitching changes. A couple of years ago in that Dodgers-Rays World Series, I wanted to see Blake Snell keep going. But I know it's like old man yelling at clouds. The game is forever changed, and it's that's going to happen. We're seeing that in hockey, where, and this is where I think the change is coming now, Kyle. We know that guys aren't. There's no more Brodeurs. Nobody's playing 75 games anymore. But in addition to going to be like between 45 and 55 games, the starters, the other thing I think, and I think Demko is at the flashpoint of it, and now you're talking about Woll, is I think they're going to say no more practicing as much as you do, that you even have to start taking, like basically already there's already four days off a month. Each team gets 4 days off a month. That's CBA mandated. But I wonder if you're going to see it even more. I do believe that that's one of the things they're discussing.
So, okay, my last point on the goalie situation, it can pertain to anyone here. So in Montreal for the opener, one of the great people that always enjoy chatting with is Patrick Lalime, right? He works for TVA Sports up in the booth there, longtime goalie in the NHL. And I asked him, because the news did come out that morning of what was going on with Woll, and I just said, what do you think is kind of the future, particularly for big goalies in this league, in terms of the human dynamic and being able to withstand, what that position demands nowadays? And he pointed to the reverse VH playing style that has become really commonplace in today's game. He said, that position is so taxing on the knees. There's so much torque built up on the knee joints when you're in that position to be able to push out at the top of the crease when it comes time to do so. Of course, the hips, as they have been for decades, are going to be taxed for the goalie position, but he pointed to that too, and part of the reason why I think we're past the days, as you say, of the Martin Brodeur-like workloads of the world, because I'm just not sure that the bodies can hold up. Okay, so from goalie talk
more lunges,
to defenseman
that's
talk,
the key, Kyle. More lunges.
That's right. Well, I've seen you work out. I think that's the regime. That is the regime that could be
lunges with a 20-pound dumbbell. That solves all the problems.
Hey, how about the problem on the Toronto defense, and particularly the future of Timothy Liljegren? A healthy scratch the first 2 games of the season. You wrote in your latest 32 Thoughts blog that it sounds like Toronto is working to find a landing spot for Liljegren. What else can you shed some light on there?
Yeah, so we didn't play again on Thursday in the back-to-back. He was still out. He's got this year and another year at a $3 million cap hit, but there are bonuses there. So a chunk of it this year has already been paid. Look, like he's a right-hand shot. He's not a small guy either. 6'1", listed at 6'1", 200 pounds. There definitely is some skill there. I mean, this is a guy who was a first-round pick 7 years ago. I can't imagine it will be too hard for them to find a taker because, right-hand shots, you don't find, like, those guys are wanted. But it's pretty clear, Kyle, and you've been around them more than I have. Would you agree that he's fallen out of favor here? He might need not only one defenseman, but two to have troubles or be out to really get back in to be a regular. Agree or disagree?
I think, yes, you've got Hakanpää, who's just not available right now because he's still hurt. And I think going into the start of the year, the conversation was it going to be Connor Timmins or Philip Myers, not Connor Timmins or Timothy Liljegren. So the way you look at things, he's 8th, 9th on the depth chart right now with if Hakanpää were to be healthy. So that's surprising. I look at Berube's comments just before the season, asking about having big guys on defense, and he just said they get in the way. It's no secret the type of body type and style of player that the new head coach in Toronto prefers. Just because you're a smaller stature doesn't mean you can't play in Berube's lineup. I mean, look at what Nick Robertson did through the preseason, and he's been pretty noticeable through the first 2 games of the year. But I'm with you. It was for now, he seems to not be on the list of the first 6 names that he calls on defense.
So I think they're going to try to solve something here because also, the Leafs are tight to the cap, and if they can make the move, they will. The challenge here is that, and this is the same thing that happened with Nick Robertson in the offseason, is that you recognize the talent, right? And you want more for him, and other teams are saying, well, he's only done this. We don't want to pay based on what you think he can do. We want to pay on what he's done. And I'm sure the same thing is kind of going in on Liljegren. No team ever wants to make a deal where you see a player blossom somewhere else and say, you gave him away for that. So that's always the challenge. But it does sound like Toronto is pretty actively working on this here. This is not something like they're, like with Robertson, it was, we'll do it at our own pace. We're the bosses here. I think this one is more like they are motivated to see if there's something that they can do.
So the Maple Leafs are 1-1 to start the year. They win the first matchup against their former coach, Sheldon Keefe, the New Jersey Devils on the road.
The way that game started, 3-0. One of my friends texted me. He goes, "Do you think the Devils hate Keefe?" I'm like, "What?" He goes,
"Oh my
Do you
gosh.
think the Devils hate Keefe?" I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, they're losing 3-0 in a game that would be big for him." I'll tell you this. I remember. I have 2 stories I remember like this. Once, Glenn Healy, when he was playing net for Toronto, I think it was Vancouver, and he had a shutout and he lost it in the last minute, and the Leafs played great. I think Messier was playing for Vancouver at the time, and so he came in. Pat Quinn came into the media room after, and they played great, and he was furious. And he, like, the first thing he said was, "I thought these guys liked Glenn Healy." And we're like looking at him. He goes, they blew the shutout for him. Like, he was furious that they blew the shutout in the last minute. And the other one I remember was Butch Carter when he coached the Raptors. Antonio Davis, his first game back in Indiana, the Raptors got killed. And Carter came out and he said the same thing. I said, "I thought these guys liked Antonio. For them to go back there and play like that, for a guy they supposedly like," he was furious. So it was just kind of funny hearing my buddy say that. Yeah, you're sitting there and you're like, maybe, I don't know, maybe the Devils were wired too tight. I don't know what it was, but the Maple Leafs jumped on them, even without their first line getting points yet. That's always a tough one. Like, Keefe said all the right things during the day, and he didn't pour any gasoline on the fire, but Kyle, you know how much these people are competitors. He wanted to win that game like 14-0. And that start must have been rough for him to sit through. It was funny. Like, I asked one Toronto guy what the difference is, if there is any, between Keefe and Berube. And he said, like, it's not a criticism. And even though I know people might run with this, he didn't mean it as a criticism. He just said, look, this is a fact. He said, Keefe is intense all the time. Berube is intense when it matters, but at other times he tends to dial it back and be a bit more relaxed. He said it's not a criticism of Keefe, that's just the way he is. But he said that's the difference between the two guys. That's a tough one. Like, if you're Keefe and you're the Devils, you want to win that one, and they came out and they laid an egg right away.
Max Pacioretty scores his first as a Leaf. Steven Lorentz scores his first. He's quickly becoming a fan.
You can tell Berube
already
likes him, eh?
Oh, that fourth line. I mean, think about how tough of a start to the year they had last season. And Berube's a guy that likes to roll his four lines when he can, and they're giving him plenty of reasons to. Both nights, I thought.
Oh, yeah, those guys were good. And I think they're better with McMahon playing too. I think they're better with him.
All right. You want to talk Shesterkin now?
Yeah, okay, let's do that.
So, what a way for him to start the season. 31 save shutout against the Penguins. Rangers win 6-0 on Wednesday. Where do you want to begin with all of this on Shesterkin?
Okay, so let's start with I mentioned when I wrote this week on Wednesday that I couldn't prove Weeks' report about the 8-time 11. I wasn't doubting it. I just didn't have that information. I mean, not that I thought in any way, shape, or form he was wrong, and not that he needs my confirmation anyway, but I do think that was the offer. What I'm curious about is, and this is what people wouldn't tell me, is when that offer was made. Because it sounds like it came pretty late. And deadlines spur action, and sometimes, like, look at Swayman, for example. Deadlines spur action, and Shesterkin had indicated the Rangers didn't seem to be too concerned about the fact that Shesterkin had indicated he wouldn't negotiate during the season. But I think this offer came pretty much late, like close to the start of the season. I don't think that was on the table earlier. And, he turned it down. And I'm with what I know now, I'm not surprised that he turned it down. Like, I got to think that the Rangers, well, look, it is a very generous offer, and I would happily say yes if anyone was going to offer me that contract. I think when they offered that, they probably had a good idea it wasn't going to be accepted. And here's my theory, and this is what I believe. I'm sure I'm in the ballpark here. I may not have it exactly right, but I'm sure I'm in the ballpark here. Shesterkin is the best player on the Rangers, and he and his representatives are saying he should be paid as if he's the best player on the Rangers. And right now, the highest paid guy is Panarin, very deserving too. He is at 11.64 and slightly more. And the highest paid goalie in NHL history is Price at 10.5. And the Rangers, while they are willing to make Shesterkin the highest paid goalie, we've already established that, they are not willing to go there. And this is one of the interesting things about my argument, the reaction to it, is that if you take a look at the highest paid player, we've gone from McDavid at 12.5 to McKinnon at 12.6 to Matthews times at 13.25 to Draisaitl at 14. So the jumps are like 100K, 625, 750. If, for argument's sake, they were to give Shesterkin 11.65, they're going 1.15 million on price. And Kyle, we have both negotiated contracts before. I had people who say to me, if the guy's worth it and you need him, which they do, and he is, just give him the money. Who cares what the jump is? But and I know that people who negotiate deals, they don't think that way. They're like, I'm going to look like I'm getting clobbered, that I'm making the jump that big. I don't want to do that. And some people think that's stupid. Whatever, you can have your point. I still know people who think that way. So it's business. Eventually, I believe the Rangers are going to get there because it's, if you look at the way they play, like Shesterkin is the human eraser, right? They do things knowing that they've got him back there. They would completely have to change themselves if he left. So I think at the end of the day, unless it's so ridiculous they don't feel they can do it, they're going to have to do it. Now, what does he want? I really think in every conversation right now, you talk with team and agents, it's percentage of the cap. Now, there's some who don't agree. There's some who feel differently, but it does dominate the conversation. Panarin's percentage is 14.29% when he signed. That is fifth highest in the NHL. It's behind Draisaitl, McKinnon, Matthews, McDavid. McDavid's got the highest number, as he deserves to be, 15.72. Panarin is 14.29. I have to think that Shesterkin's reps, I don't know if they're there, but I'm betting they started around there. So I think the number that they initially put with their stake in the ground is around 12 to 12 and a half. Now, that's my guess, but I think I'm not far wrong. I think that if I'm wrong, I'm not far wrong. I think that's the strategy here. After calling around, I think that was what was discussed. And I do believe at the end of the day, and I don't know how much everybody's going to bend here. I don't know if talks have been completely shelved because the puck has been dropped, knowing that you can always go back. There are cases where people have said we're not talking during the year and deals still get done. Like, I think Marner said it right. I don't care if they talk during the year, was his comment. Just don't come to me unless I have to know anything. And teams and an agent can always do that. That's what an agent's paid for. But that's where I think it is. I think that Shesterkin and his representatives feel that he's the best player on the Rangers and he should be paid as such. And I don't know if the number is 11.65 or if the number is 12, but that's what I think he's going to do. That's what he's looking at. And like, ultimately, at the end of the day, I just think the Rangers are probably going to have to get there, whether they like it or not. He didn't look too bothered on opening night. The Penguins got dominated, but when he had to be good, he was really good.
Yeah, that he was. So, but I look at their whole salary cap setup here, Elliotte, the Rangers, because not only is he due a new contract come next season, there are a number of players that are also in the same boat. Not all of them are UFA, handful of RFA, Lafreniere, Kakko, Keandre Miller among them. How much does that kind of muddy the waters through all of this for the Rangers?
Well, that's their concern, right? And I understand it. You want to build the best possible team. The really interesting thing here is the CBA negotiations. Because if things continue the way they're going, there should be a big jump. Like, the cap for next year is a 5% raise. It's in next year's the last year of the current CBA, and it's in there. So it should be 92.4, although they can agree to move it. But then after that, it's supposed to take Like the cap has been behind the jumps because the players had to pay back the COVID losses. The cap is behind where it could be. And everybody's really careful about making projections, but people, if it goes 92-4 or 5 next year, people are predicting a pretty big jump the year after. So here's the thing, and one manager said it to me. Said Gary Bettman came out after the Board of Governors meeting at the beginning of October and said, would love to get it done early. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, love to announce it at the Stanley Cup, or wouldn't it be great if we could announce it at the Stanley Cup? And because he always holds a media conference before game 1 of the Stanley Cup final. So this is what one manager said to me. He says, what if, as part of this deal, they rip up the last year of the current CBA and they start a new one? And as a result, the cap really jumps this summer. And I said, now my mind is spinning like a top. And I said, do you know that's going to happen? He said, no, but I don't. But I'm at least thinking about the possibility. And like, if they get it done early, then we have to at least be aware of the possibility. He's talked about it with some other people. So I think what's going on here is that the teams are saying, look, we have to do this. We have to do this. We have to be careful. We have to build a team. And that's what they do. But I think a lot of the agents, especially the agents of the biggest clients, are looking at it like, what if the cap really jumps this summer? And all of a sudden, and look, Austin Matthews this week was asked about NHL players making less money than other sports. And I thought he made a great answer because, times are hard right now. Inflation's really high. Nobody wants to hear about your money problems. I thought he gave a fantastic answer to it. I thought he really did a really good job of answering it. But I do think it's an agent's job to say, my client's deal should reflect what the cap is going to be like. And that's why they all talk about percentage of the cap. So I just think that that's the way that they look at it is, if the cap jumps as much as we think it's going to jump, we don't want to sign a deal that looks bad in retrospect. And I know some people are going to hear that and they're going to say, are you crazy? $11 million? That's the way these guys are paid to think.
Wow. Fascinating.
So that's where we are. Now, Lafreniere, I don't know what to say about this one. They've definitely been talking, but I really get mixed messages about where that is. So we'll just let it play out.
All right. We'll park the Ranger talk there for now. Elsewhere around the league on Thursday, the Boston Bruins return home, their home opener. Jeremy Swayman's first start of the season under his new contract. Gives up 4 on 24 shots, but the Bruins do beat the Canadiens 6-4. How about Swayman and the Nick Suzuki run in there in front of his crease? I mean, he talked about in the Amazon series, Swayman did, about how intense he gets when someone enters his blue paint.
Didn't take long, eh?
Two of the nicest guys in the league. But they are competitors.
Suzuki had a look on his face like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like if I deck the goalie, it's not a win for Suzuki if he decks the goalie. I mean, it'll be a gif on Canadians' social media for a billion years, but it's not exactly something. It'd be a gif on Canadian social media for a billion years, but you probably get pretty heavily penalized for it. And then the Bruins start running at your guy. It is kind of funny because it's a no-win situation for Suzuki. Swayman kind of punks him a bit, but there's not really much he can do about it. I was not surprised at all about the reaction Swayman got. He played to it right, pointing to the crest on his jersey. No shock at all. Once it's done, it's done. He's a Bruin again. They got the win. It was a great night for them. The funniest thing about this game, though, was the penalty
Yes, I was gonna
that
get to
Brad
this.
Marchand got at the end of the game. So people were sending me DMs. So basically what happened is he's got the puck in the Montreal zone, and he just shoots the puck directly into the netting.
Matheson. Wrist shot. And Primo was ready to go to the bench for the extra attacker. And Marchand flips that out of play.
Boston, number 63, minor penalty, delay of game.
And this is interesting. They're giving Brad Marchand a delay of game penalty because he shot the puck out of play, but he was in Montreal's zone when he did so.
Like, it was a blatant delay tactic, but you never see that called. Like, I saw it and I started laughing. And then the referees called the penalty, and the Bruins and Montgomery were furious. They were, well, because you never see that. Someone said to me, you never see that get called. And, I said, you know why you never see that get called? Because you never see anybody do that. Like, that was like I couldn't stop laughing at my television when I saw the play. But so people were saying to me, he wasn't in his own zone, like it's not a penalty. And there is something in the rule book that says if you deliberately shoot the puck into the crowd, it's a delay of game penalty. And I guess the referees just looked at that and said, we can't let, like, I actually thought when he did it, I was like, boy, that is brilliant by Marchand. That is someone thinking the game at an elite level. And then when they called the penalty, I was like, maybe not so brilliant. I'm still laughing thinking about it.
Plan was foiled.
It was a brilliant idea. Not so great in theory. I'll tell you this. I'm not surprised the Bruins played better. They still gave up, 4 goals? But I'm not surprised they played better. They got really embarrassed in Florida. And, one of the things I heard going in was they were kind of talking about how Florida got the better of them physically in the second round last year, like kind of pushed them around a bit. And I think they were reminded of some of the things that happened, and it still went really badly for them. And I saw how mad Frederick was that Tkachuk wouldn't fight him, and that's
Those are childhood buddies from St. Louis.
That's Tkachuk, wily as ever. But I think that's one of the reasons that Frederick was so mad, was because the Bruins had talked about some of the things that happened in that series, and you can't gain your revenge then. You're supposed to get your revenge now. And they didn't get their revenge, and B, they lost the game. So it was a really, really frustrating night for them. Pittsburgh too. That Husso really struggled. Like that fourth goal where he got pulled. That was I think Lucas Raymond is going to have a spectacular year again, and he had 2 assists. But those are those games this year, like the Pittsburgh Detroits, like those games I think are going to determine a playoff berth in the Eastern Conference, right? Those are 2 teams that are going to be battling each other. I watched not a lot, but I watched a bit of Buffalo. I thought it was really interesting how, I know some people didn't like that penalty call at the end of the game that gave LA the power play as Kopitar found the fountain of youth. But I thought it was really interesting how Lindy Ruff came out and said, no, that was a penalty. I didn't like the play. It's early in Buffalo, and I thought they played better. I thought that was a goal. They got goalie too. Like Kemper was fantastic. That's the best game I've seen Kemper play in a year. He like that. It couldn't have started any better for you if you're the LA Kings. Kemper starts out like that. Kopitar gets a hat trick, and Byfield, who'd made a big mistake earlier in the game on one of the goals, he made a great hustle play to set up the empty netter and Kopitar's third goal. But I watch all those games. Like there are so many games right now. Pittsburgh, Detroit, Buffalo, LA, even though they're in different conferences, those are all the teams on the playoff bubble, right? They're right there. And you just sit there and you say, these games are already huge. Like, I don't know why, Kyle, but it just seems to me like so many of these games right now have such a big feel to them. Do you agree?
I do, because in the back of my mind, consciously, I'm like, we can't be the overreaction podcast here, Elliotte, but I'm with you. I'm with you. Like there seems like, and it's kind of been tracking that way for a few years now. I mean, you've talked about it at length on this podcast about how demanding a lot of ownership is, about wins, about success, and there's consequence when that doesn't happen right out of the gate when it is expected to. I will say a funny story about Kemper. I was told, so the day he found out that he had been traded back to LA, I believe that was the same day him and his wife found out they were expecting again.
Oh, wow.
Talk about a whirlwind all in one day, and no better way to have a calm, measured, settling in type start of the year than the performance he put forth against the Sabres.
You know, that's a great story. I didn't know that. That's a great story. I'll say too, Olofsson had 2 goals for Golden Knights against Colorado the other night. We've talked about on this podcast about how Keller talked about Gunther's shot, and he's got 4 goals already. One of the Sabres said to me, Olofsson, he's up at that level too. He's got one of the best shots they've ever seen, and they're wondering like if he becomes a breakout guy this year because of who he's playing with and the way he can shoot the puck.
Right. I mean, he was a real kind of power play specialist for a while in Buffalo before he kind of fell out of favor there because of his release on the flank. Okay, let's go to the final thought now, which is presented by GMC Elliotte, and welcome to the National Hockey League Macklin Celebrini. Third shift of the game on Thursday against the St. Louis Blues. Didn't go for necessarily a shot attempt on net. It was a pass across that went off the skate of Matt Kessel of St. Louis and into the goal for his first goal in the National Hockey League.
Here is Celebrini pulling up, spinning, shoveling across. They score! Off a deflection in front. Celebrini and Eklund combine.
They don't ask you how, they ask you how many.
No, it's all going to look the same when they got the puck and the plaque afterwards celebrating the occasion. How about Draymond Green wearing this San Jose Sharks TL71 jersey, the big necklace on? He was at the game on Thursday, Elliotte. I mean, what a cool moment for a franchise, as we know, had a lot of tough nights watching games last season, and a fan base that had something to celebrate right out of the gate here on Thursday.
Well, Kyle, of course, we're shortchanging the Blues a bit here. Their fans are going to feel like we're not giving them proper credit, so let's mention them first. Second straight comeback victory, opening night, or opening afternoon, I guess, against the Kraken. And then the 4-goal comeback, down 4-1 to win 5-4 in overtime, won the opening faceoff, scored, never give up the puck. So a great couple of days for the Blues. But in a lot of ways, this night is about San Jose because last year, as you said, was so dreary. And even though they don't get the W, this is the start of something that feels spectacular for San Jose. It's like one of those scenes in a movie when it goes from really cloudy to really sunny out of nowhere. It's a completely different vibe. It's a completely changed atmosphere. They announced a sellout, 17,000 plus. The two of them do the helmet off warm up, him and Will Smith, when they come out. And, you know, one of the things somebody was texting me, I had a friend who was at the game there tonight, and he said, you know, normally you don't see warm ups like that in San Jose. Like they're not usually that busy. But there were people there early who wanted to see the two of them warm up. And it just shows you how much just his arrival has completely changed the franchise. And, you know, they got pounded in the first period in terms of shots. I think they were down, I think it was 21-7 at one point when I looked up. But that one goal, even though that St. Louis scored not long after, it just completely changes the mood. Like, even if it's a fluke, it doesn't matter. And then, like the assist he had in the second period, it's the Patrick Kane play, right? Where you're going behind the net, the goalie thinks you're coming out the other side, but you leave yourself enough room to pass backwards and Toffoli scores. And, what did Zetterlund and Eklund tell us about this guy? That when they watched him on TV last year, they're like, he's both a scorer and a setup man. He can do both. He can create offense with his shot and with his passing ability. And in the first 40 minutes of his career, we saw the perfect evidence of that. It's, the franchise desperately needed a jolt. It got the jolt. Now, there are going to be a lot of long, tough nights, but they gave their fans a lot to cheer for in their home opener. And you know what? That's all you can ask for. And Green being there, because Rick, his father, has run sports sciences for the Golden State Warriors for a long time. In a couple years ago, Green watched Celebrini play in Chicago when he played for the Chicago Steel, because the Golden State Warriors were there on a road trip, and he went and watched a couple periods of a game. And he left that game early because the Steel weren't very good that night. And as Celebrini told us, I said, why does he get to leave? I've watched plenty of their bad games over the years. Well, he wasn't leaving early on Thursday night. That one was really good for San Jose. Very, very entertaining. And you could see the skill right away. I have to tell you, though, you know what the weirdest thing is?
What's that?
I'm watching that line. It's Celebrini, Toffoli, and Eklund. What are their numbers?
Oh, they're all in the 70s.
71, 72, and 73.
And Toffoli was part of the 70s line in LA once upon a time.
Yes. But they were slackers. Their numbers were too far apart. They were 70, 73, and 77, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. 71. So I'm trying to think of, and maybe somebody out there will come up with something, but I'm trying to think of the last time. I have to think in the original six when everybody wore numbers, nobody ever got to 28. like you were a borderline NHLer back then if you were wearing number 28. So I have to think that, there was a time when people would wear three numbers in a row. But I'm trying to remember the last time anyone did. I was watching this game and I was looking at it off the top of my head. And I'm thinking, no way. And especially numbers that high.
Right.
Like
that's good thought line fodder.
Yeah, excellent thought line fodder. Come on, thought liners, come up with this. That's like playing Keno in Vegas, right? Like those giant numbers.
I'm just picturing like showing up to a training camp in the 40s and you're assigned number 24 and you're like, oh my God, this is not a good sign. I've got no chance. They've given me number 24. And actually, you know what I really thought of when you talked about the movie with the dark clouds lifting and sunshine revealing itself? The ending of The Truman Show. That's where my mind went.
Ah, good pick. Good pick. Very good pick. I wasn't crazy about that movie, though. I didn't like The Truman Show. I could see...
What?
I could see why you would. That's right up your sappy alley.
It was one of Jim Carrey's finest.
Overrated. That whole
In
movie
case
was
I don't
about,
see ya.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
That whole movie was about getting him an Oscar. I don't like movies like that. Anyway, the other number one I remember is when Pat Burns coached the Maple Leafs, and they were really good. Darby Hendrickson got called up for a playoff game. Kind of out of nowhere, they had injuries, and they gave him number 9. And people were a little. I didn't cover them that much then, but I remember hearing Burns interviewed about this. Is that he said to the trainers, "This is a big game. He's going to be nervous. Don't give him a stock car number." Like,
oh, that's a great
don't
line.
give him a stock car number. Make him feel part of the group. Give him a lower number. So they gave him number 9. I thought that was a fantastic line from Pat Burns.
What was your jersey number in hockey?
I wore 2 and I wore 14. You?
I wore 9 for Paul Kariya.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I didn't play anything like him, but he was my guy.
Do you know why I wore 2?
Why?
Because Bobby Orr wore that number in junior for the Oshawa Generals. I saw a picture of him, and I really like Bobby Orr. And 4 was already taken, which of course was his NHL number. But I saw a picture of him wearing number 2 in junior, so I took 2. And then the biggest guy on our team, because you remember back then you play every 2 years, right? So the year I graduated to, I think, Pee Wee, the biggest guy on the team already had number 2. He got there before I did, so I wasn't winning that one. So I picked 14.
Because of Doug Wickenheiser?
No, there were only like 2 or 3 numbers left over. And Doug Wickenheiser would be a good pick, though. There were only 2 or 3 numbers left over, and I liked the other numbers less than I liked 14. It wasn't for anyone in particular.
All right, the more you know with Elliotte Friedman. That was great. And that was the final thought, presented by GMC. When we come back, the thought line and more. You're listening to 32 Thoughts, the podcast. Listen to the 32 Thoughts podcast ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Okay, time now for hockey's favorite audience participation segment, the Thought Line. Reminder, the phone number to call, 1-833-311-3232. The email address, 32thoughts@sportsnet.ca. Elliot, we got another submission of the on-the-road coffee setup this week. The following is growing and growing. We are marrying the coffee and hockey world together, bean by bean.
Oh, it's about time we made an honest man out of you, Kyle.
Just happy to be part of it. Let's kick off this week. Colin over in Scotland. Hi, guys. There was a question on the Thought Line last week about the mechanics of waivers, and it made me wonder about how it works for those last days of preseason when lots of guys hit the waiver wire. They sure did again this year. I'm specifically thinking of a situation where a team desperately needs, for example, a goalie. If 6 goalies go on waivers on the same day, does the team generally put in a claim for just one of the goalies and hope they get lucky? Because if they put in multiple claims, they could get stuck with all of them. Or if they're successful in more than one claim, do they get the chance to withdraw the ones that they don't want or need? Thanks for the podcast, guys. It really helps this overseas fan keep up with what's going on around the league. So what's the answer there?
Hello, Scotland. That's my first thing to say. Glad you're listening. Once you put in a claim and it goes past the deadline, which is 2:00 Eastern, you can't take it back. If you get the player, you get the player. We did see one example last week of where a team claimed 2 players, and that was Vegas. They claimed both Schwint and Lavoie, got them both, and the reason is they had 3 guys on waivers the same day, and they thought they were going to lose 1 or 2 of them, which they did with Aston Reese going to Columbus. So you can get more than one player. I mean, ultimately, for cap or roster reasons, you have to be able to get someone on your roster who you win a claim to. But once you put it in and it's past the deadline, you can't take it back out. So if you get the player, you get the player. And if you don't want them, and we're seeing this crazy situation with Raphael Lavoie where he's on waivers again on Thursday, if you don't want to keep the player, you can put them back on waivers, which Vegas did. You know what? Someone was asking me, have you ever seen anything even close to this with Lavoie? Do you remember a couple of years ago when Eric Comrie was on waivers 4 times?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes, that's the only thing I can think of that's close to it. And he kept on getting claimed, so he was really bouncing around.
And if my memory serves, I think of like Anton Forsberg in that 56-game season. He bounced around a few times before ultimately landing in Ottawa with all the injuries they had in goal that year.
Yes, that's true.
Guy.
That's a good pull. Anything that happens in Ottawa or the Western League, Kyle remembers it.
Everywhere else, I am hopeless. All right, voicemail up next. Terrace from Oakville, Ontario.
Got a quick question. Got a highly debated topic going on in our groups. Is the Utah Hockey Club an actual new organization, or is it simply a relocation? Is the first goal in club history, or just simply a new team? Atlanta to Calgary? Questions, thoughts? Appreciate it. Take care.
That's a great question. Officially, after the Board of Governors meeting where they approved it, they called it the sale and relocation of the Coyotes to Utah. So I guess whoever was arguing relocation wins the bet. I hope it's you. I hope you won the bet because you submitted the question on the thought line. But from a purely legal standpoint, it was sale and relocation. Now, if you're looking for any technicalities, in case you're on the wrong side of this argument, remember Alex Morello, the former owner of the team, had the right within 5 years, if he could build a building, that he would be able to have a new team, and he kept the name and the trademarks and all that stuff. But when he failed and he was unable to go ahead with the auction to buy the land where he hoped to build, he relinquished his rights to all that and gave it back. So it's not like there's anything anymore in his possession that gives him rights to the Coyotes or any future team there. But sale and relocation was the term I see used after the Board of Governors.
Right. So Dylan Guenther will have the first goal in Utah franchise history.
Yes. Yes, he does. That's the way it's called. Even if you look at the NHL's own social media, they call it the first goal in Utah franchise history.
Yes, they did. How about Clayton Keller calling all of that, hey? Did you see the video where he predicted he would score the first goal? And I think back to what he told us, raving about his release, and that was on display in that play as well.
Clayton Keller is going to, when he's done in 20 years, he is going to be a heck of an analyst. I think he takes Kevin's job.
Yeah, in terms of being on the right side of the argument, put 20 down on that one. I'm with you there. All right, next we'll go to Taylor from London, Ontario. Hey guys, my question is regarding the scheduling. You guys have mentioned how Boston doesn't have many back-to-backs early on in the season. Meanwhile, you look at a team like Toronto, who starts the season with a back-to-back with travel, another one less than 2 weeks into the season, and a total of 4 back-to-backs by November 13th. Does the NHL do anything to balance the amount of back-to-backs? Why is there such a difference in what teams have in these back-to-back scenarios? As a Leafs fan, I just want to know who at the schedule makers our team ticked off. Thanks for all the great work. That sound, Elliotte, you hear is the teams out west playing their tiny violins.
I always bring this up. I'm glad you did this, Kyle, because you saved me from doing it. Whenever somebody complains about the Eastern team's travel, I always get notes from someone in the Western Conference. Tell those Eastern teams and their fans to stop their whining. All of their trips are like an hour. It was like last year when Merrick was complaining about the bus ride from Manhattan to Long Island. The West teams do not want to hear about these kinds of problems. Basically, what a lot of it comes down to, Taylor, is building availability. And Boston's a busy building. They have, not right now, but they have the Celtics playing shortly. They have the Bruins, and they have whatever else they have going on in there. Same with Toronto. They have the Raptors, they have the Leafs, and they have whatever else is going on in there. So a lot of that is due to building availability. The other thing that happens is, a lot of the U.S. teams, They try to schedule as many of their games, especially if they're in really football heavy markets. And to be honest, everywhere is football heavy. The NFL is king. But particularly when it's not just the NFL, it's also college football and high school football. They really prefer as much as they can to backload their games. They want as many games as late into football season as possible, especially if you can't wait until January for the NFL, you at least try to wait until December when high school football and college football is over. I think the other thing too is, and I think Toronto understands understands it, although I do think they privately complain about it a bit more than they used to, is the Maple Leafs are the cornerstone of the Canadian television deal, so they have to play every Saturday night. Now, they don't play as much at home as they used to on Saturday nights, but I know there is at least... there have been times in the last few years where the Maple Leafs have complained about the flexibility of their schedule because they have to play on Saturday nights all the time. And I don't think that'll ever change because there's too much TV money at stake. But I know at least once it came up in the television negotiations.
Right. Because certainly, I mean, when you think about the days of hometown hockey, originally though it was on Sunday, and then a number of years into it moved to Monday. And honestly, it allowed for more marquee matchups in the East without having as many back-to-back scenarios, right?
Right. But again, in the Eastern Conference, it's not perfect, but it's nowhere near as bad as what the teams in the West have to deal with. Nowhere near as bad.
That's for sure. Okay, we'll finish with Jeremy from Detroit, the Wings fan from Detroit. Jeremy asks, hey guys, Red Wings fan here. EA Sports did their annual simulation for the season and had the Rangers beating Edmonton in 7 games for the Stanley Cup. Has any team lost the Stanley Cup in 7 games in back-to-back years before? That would be brutal for any fan to go through that. Do you have a guess on this answer, Elliotte?
Okay, I'm trying to remember this. Lost in 7 in back-to-back. I'm gonna guess, Kyle, that this did happen. Like I know, like after the original 6 ended and the new teams came in, the Canadians wiped out and the Bruins wiped out the Blues for 3 straight years. If I remember correctly, when the Canadians beat Chicago in '73, that was a 7-gamer, but Chicago didn't go the next year. That was Philly, Boston. So I'm gonna guess that it happened somewhere in the original 6. Am I right or am I wrong?
You are correct. You're getting very warm.
Okay,
how much more hints or suggestions, nudges do you want?
Off the top, I like lots of nudges. Off the top of my head, I can't think of who it would be, but can you give me an approximate timeline? I'm gonna try to figure out if I can get this.
Okay. Well, I'll say it was in the 1950s, and I would
now,
just say...
1950 was the last Game 7 overtime. That was Red Wings beat the Rangers. No, but 51 was Bill Barilko. So that wouldn't be the Rangers the next year. Okay, hold on, let me think. In the 50s... because 50 is the famous one. It was the last Game 7 overtime winner. I'm going through my head back in the 50s when I was like 20 years old already. What do I remember about watching the Stanley Cup final? Okay, so that's the Canadians. That's the Canadians winning the record 5 in a row. Ugh.
Mm-hmm. And what happened just before that?
Oh, so you're telling me it's like... Well, I remember the Red Wings won. The Red Wings won back-to-back in 54 and 55.
Did they
beat someone? Did they beat someone twice in a row in 7 games?
Yes, they did. The Montreal Canadiens.
Really?
Yes.
That's great work, Kyle.
And then the Canadians responded by, as you say, ripping off 5 cups in a row. So they got over it.
Yes. They sure got over it.
What a great question. And the irony
that is a great question.
The irony that Jeremy writes that question in from Detroit.
That's a good one. That was a good question. That was good research.
I tried to do the research on my own this time instead of just defaulting and running right to the good people at Sportsnet Stats. So I hope I was right. But I think that's what it was. 1954-55. Detroit over Montreal, back-to-back.
I can't think of anything.
Games.
I'm just looking at the list of Stanley Cups. I don't see anything after that would contradict your stellar research. Yeah.
And also, up until the late 1930s, it wasn't a best of 7 in the final, right? It was a best of 5, and then even different formats before then. So I was just looking under the best of 7 format. That was the only one I could find.
Great work.
Great question from Jeremy. So that's another edition of the Thought Line. One final time, a reminder, the phone number to call, 1-833-311-3232. 32 Thoughts at sportsnet.ca is the email to write in. More 32 Thoughts, the podcast, after this. Okay, welcome back to 32 Thoughts, the podcast. Elliotte, Wednesday night, Golden Knights kicked off their season against the Avalanche. Bit of a wild one offensively. They beat Colorado 8-4. You had some intel on who was in attendance at that game with an eye towards the Four Nations Cup in February. What did you learn?
Well, so Doug Armstrong was there. And Don Sweeney is officially the GM, but Doug Armstrong is running the Team Canada management for both the Four Nations and for the Olympics. And Jim Nill was there, was part of the management team. And I was looking at this. Think about these rosters. Mark Stone, Alex Pietrangelo, Shea Theodore, Aiden Hill, Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, Devon Taves. Like, there's 7 guys in that game. That's basically a third of Team Canada could potentially be playing in that game.
And they really don't have much time to waste, right? Like, all of a sudden the deadline is going to come really quick here.
December 2nd. Yes. But I'm looking at this game and I'm saying to myself, that's 30% of Team Canada that's on the ice there. I mean, look, like, you can debate Theodore, you can debate Hill, but the other 5 guys are all going to be there. They're going to take Taves and Makar as a duo, and I'm pretty confident in saying they're taking McKinnon, Pietrangelo, and Stone.
Yeah, really going out on a limb there for each. Well, that's great.
Now, you stayed away from these predictions, but I said USA is the team to beat. Agree or disagree?
How can you not say Canada isn't? And I'm not looking at it through the lens of a Canadian even.
Yes, you are.
I'm just not sure. No, I'm just looking at through it objectively. I
think
you're
Canada's
not the team to beat. You're anti-Canadian.
I look at the goaltending and I look at the overall depth, and I don't know. I think you have to say the USA are the favorites going in. By the way, the Dallas player who told us that Eichel was unbelievable and doesn't get enough credit for being one of the best players in the league, they looked good with that prediction on Wednesday night. He looked phenomenal.
4 assists for Jack Eichel in that one. Okay, first hockey night in Canada of the season coming up on Saturday. I'll be in Toronto, the Leafs home opener. Sidney Crosby and the Penguins in town. Things settled a little bit with the Leafs and Penguins both winning on Thursday. So that's one of our early games on CBC and Sportsnet. Montreal and Ottawa from Montreal on Sportsnet East and City. 2 late games, the Flames and the Flyers. How about this? The Oilers and Connor Bedard and the Blackhawks. McDavid, Bedard going head-to-head for the first time this season. What's the first Saturday like in studio typically?
We haven't seen Kevin in a long time, so it's going to be loud. I think that's the safe prediction.
How long until the ripping begins?
He'll walk in at about 4 o'clock carrying a Starbucks. Won't offer, like, the difference between everybody else and Kevin is everybody else will text, does anyone want a Starbucks? He won't. He'll just walk in with his. And then it'll be about 9 straight hours of abuse. We will leave at the end of the night.
Ready for it?
Shells of our former selves. Oh yeah, I'm ready for it. I love it.
Season's back, Elliotte. Great slate of games on Saturday and all weekend. For those that have the ability to tune in, enjoy the action, have yourselves a great weekend. We'll talk to you again on Monday.